Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction Company, where we are taking a look at an Automag 180. This is one of the early of the Magnum automatic pistols, and this was designed and manufactured in the very early 1970s. Now, the origin of this thing is basically, if I can take a little artistic license here, it basically came down to a chat between friends, which turned into a boast, which turned into a hold my beer sort of moment. The two guys who were responsible were a gun shop owner named Harry Sanford and a gunsmith by the name of Max Gera. Now, Max Gera was actually an Italian immigrant. He was born in Venice in 1945, emigrated to the United States at a relatively young age, and went to work as a gunsmith. He actually spent some time working for Pachmayr, a company that's still around today, and ended up leaving Pachmayr and going to work for Harry Sanford as a general purpose gunsmith for a gun shop, doing repairs and all that sort of stuff. And apparently at one point in 68 or 69, the two of them were talking and someone brought up the fact that nobody made an automatic pistol for the .44 Magnum cartridge. And well, could you even do that? And they started thinking about it, and Max Gera basically said, hold my beer, yeah, we could do that. One of the main fundamental problems here is .44 Magnum is a rimmed cartridge, which is notoriously difficult to use in box magazines. It can be done, but it's difficult. So if you're going to design a Magnum automatic pistol, you can make your life a lot simpler by starting with a rimless cartridge. And Gera realized that all you had to do to get rimless .44 Magnum was take a .308 or a .30-06 cartridge and cut it to the same length as .44 Magnum, because the case head is the case diameter is virtually identical. So that became the .44 AMP or Automag pistol cartridge. Basically, it's the same dimension as a .44 Magnum, just rimless. And it was originally designed to have the same ballistics as a .44 Magnum. So, give or take, about a 240 grain bullet at about 1,250 feet per second. Now, once you have this sort of cartridge, designing the gun is going to be a little more difficult than a Magnum revolver because, well, you have to hold on to the recoil force somehow and use that energy to cycle the pistol. With a revolver, all you have to do is make sure that nothing moves. With an automatic, you have to make sure that things do move, but they don't move too much or the gun explodes. So Gera sat down and started doing the developmental work, the initial design of this, and he decided that it really ought to have a rotating bolt in order to properly contain the force, the magnitude of energy in a .44 Magnum, and so that's what he designed. Now, well, I'll tell you what, let's take a look at how the gun works, and then we'll come back and talk about what happened after that, because most of the story, or a lot of the story, comes after these guns were introduced. What we have here is a short recoil, rotating bolt, single action automatic pistol. So we have a single stack magazine here in the grip. They did actually make these in two different cartridges. They made them in the .44 AMP, which, as I described, is basically rimless .44 Magnum. They also made them much smaller number in .357 AMP, and that was the same cartridge but necked down to .357. So the magazine holds, I believe, 7, but it is recommended that you only load 5. It gets a little less reliable when the mag's fully loaded. This was not ever intended to be like a military pistol or a defensive pistol or the sort of thing that you stake your life on. This was intended for target shooting, handgun hunting, and just the cool factor of being a really huge pistol. So reliability is kind of on par with that. They're generally pretty good, but they do malfunction from time to time. And you know, this isn't a Glock 19. This thing has some character to it. So I mentioned it's single action only, so you have to cock the hammer the first time or cycle the bolt. It does lock open on an empty magazine, and interestingly, you'll notice the slide and barrel assembly are just kind of rattly loose when the gun's locked open. In order to take this apart, you actually do exactly this. You lock the bolt open and then pull the magazine out, and then we have a disassembly lever here, very much like a Luger. Just drop that down. The barrel assembly comes off the front. You can then take this and release the hold open catch and untension the springs and bring the bolt forward. To disassemble this further, you would actually use a hex wrench and take out these two bolts. These are the recoil guide rods. Once these are out, all the rest of the parts come off. But we don't need to do that because I can show you exactly how this all works in this current configuration. First off, it's interesting to note that this actually has an accelerator in it, and that's this guy right here. So when this is fully in battery, this gets pushed forward like that. You can see the other surface of the accelerator right there. So when I move this, that moves like so. The purpose of this is when the slide starts to move backwards here, this impinges on a piece of the frame and it kicks backward and it gives the bolt an initial shove to get the bolt moving faster to aid in extraction. If we look at the front of the bolt, you can see there's one very large lug right here. That's the surface that the accelerator pushes on. We also have locking lugs, not terribly unlike an AR-15's. A little difficult to see down in there, but there are a matching set of recesses, there you go, that those lugs engage in to keep everything nice and tightly held together when the gun's firing. And then we have an open cam track here with a lug right in the back. So when I pull the bolt back, notice that it rotates right there. Right there. That is done by this lug. It runs crosswise through the middle of the bolt. That's why there's this big open space in the center of the bolt. You can see it right there with the firing pin spring going into it. And then at the back of the bolt, right up in there, underneath these grasping surfaces, this track curves upward and downward on this side. That is where the bolt rests when it's all the way closed. So that track, by curving downward, forces the bolt to rotate, which locks those lugs. Then, when the accelerator starts to kick it back, the first thing that has to happen, well, the bolt and the barrel travel backwards together until the barrel stops moving. And then the bolt is forced to rotate, unlock, and then it can open. As far as controls go, we have a couple. This is your bolt hold open lever, so if you don't have a magazine, you can lock the bolt open using that. We have a safety here, which can only be engaged when the hammer is cocked. Then the safety goes up, that disconnects the trigger, renders the gun safe. That renders the gun ready to fire. Sights are what you would expect from the 1970s, sort of revolver style. Big old sights, like so. Looking at markings, we have a basic Made in USA here on the right. And then the main marking is on the left side of the slide assembly. Automag, it's the 44 AMP model 180. I don't know where the 180 came from, but that's the designation they chose. Pasadena, California. So this marking will change as different companies came and went. We'll talk about that in a moment. The serial number is engraved in the bottom of the grip frame right there. And there's a cool surprise hiding under the magazine. You had the option when you purchased the gun, if you were a pre-order customer, of having your initials engraved in the frame as well. And so those are the initials of the initial purchaser of this particular gun. He chose to have that done, so that's kind of cool. You could also choose for an additional fee. You could have initials and serial number engraved in your magazines as well, but this particular owner apparently opted not to do that. A couple other things to point out. This gun is made entirely of stainless steel, which brings up some potential galling and friction issues. You do have to use a specialized lubricant with these, a lubricant that's intended for stainless steel. Sometimes people don't, and sometimes that results in problems. Also, as far as handling goes, it is interesting to me that while this gun is large and heavy, and top heavy, there's a big old space here at the top of the gun above your hand. Despite all of that, it's one of the few Magnum automatic pistols that doesn't feel like the grip is just weirdly, ridiculously huge. This is actually not a problem to hold on to, which is a little curious because most of these have cartridges that are basically the same size. When you look at things like this and the Wildy and the Desert Eagle, and the other Magnum automatic pistols out there. So this was one of the very first of them, and continues today, I think, to be one of the most collectible of them. So the Automag began as a collaboration between Gera and Sanford, and the problem developed in late 1970, and Gera ended up leaving before the guns were even finished or in production. There were personal arguments and issues and incompatibilities between the two of them, and I think a lot of this was spurred by the arrival of investment money. People who saw this idea. Sanford went out looking for investors in the project because it takes a lot of money to tool up a production facility to manufacture a new gun, and he couldn't do that on the cash flow of a gun shop. So he went out to get investors, and once you have investors, Gera describes it as being like a nest of vultures, and I can understand, having some experience in the firearms industry, it would get, I suspect, very stressful and unpleasant for someone who was a gunsmith who had approached this as a technical challenge and wasn't interested in all that sort of drama. So Gera left the picture. His name is on the original patents, but it's not on the final patents. Sanford would continue with some other engineers to help finish off the design and actually make it compatible for proper manufacturing. They would start selling them in May of 1970, and 9 months later, they'd start selling them in August of 1970, and about 9 months later, in May of 71, they went bankrupt and out of business. The problem was, in order to try and drive production volume and sales volume, they were selling the guns at a tremendous discount. So they were selling the guns for about, I think it was $240 a piece, and they cost multiple times that much to actually manufacture. You know, the hope was, if you can drive enough interest, you can get economy of scale, and you can bring your manufacturing costs down and make the whole thing profitable. It didn't work out because they didn't get enough people buying the gun fast enough, and instead of it turning into a big-time success, it just fell flat on its face. So they made a total of about 3,000 guns in that time period, which is quite a lot, but then they went under. Now, this wouldn't be the end of the story. Far from it, because Sanford would over and over and over manage to find new investors. Someone who looked at this pistol and went, "That's just so cool. Yeah, we should make it again. It'll be a success this time." And there were no less than 5 different companies between 1972 and 1982 that put in money, started manufacture, made some more guns, on average about 1,200 guns per company, and then went out of business themselves. So in total, about 9,000 of these were made by 1982, which is actually a remarkably high number given kind of the chaos involved in the design and the production and every other aspect of this story. 82 was pretty much the end of it, which is unfortunate because it was in 1983 that Clint Eastwood used one of these as Dirty Harry in the movie Sudden Impact and made them suddenly very popular. But at that point, I think they had exhausted everyone who really thought that these could be a successful business venture, until, actually, relatively recently. Harry Sanford passed away in 1996, and in, I believe, 2015, his son, or son-in-law, I'm not sure which, I think son, sold all the intellectual property and the rights and the parts and everything to a company that has decided that today this can be a successful venture again. And they have actually reintroduced the Automag 180 at SHOT Show just a couple of years ago. So they are, I don't think I've seen any actually delivered yet, but in theory, these are going back into production now. In general, if you look at the Automags, you will find like 6 different manufacturing names and locations. Now, this particular one is from the very first batch. This was made in Pasadena by the original company, and so it kind of has, it's like the best of the bunch, I would think, from a collectability standpoint. But there are a bunch of other variations out there. So if you would like to see detailed pictures of this, or Rock Island's catalog description of it, or their value estimate, take a look at their auction catalog. You can get there by going to the description text below, clicking the link to Forgotten Weapons, and then from there I have a link that will take you to Rock Island's catalog page. Thanks for watching.